The box sat on my kitchen table for 3 weeks. It was a gift from my daughter, Sarah, for my 50th birthday. A sleek, cardboard promise titled Heritage and Ancestry, Discover Your Story. "Oh, Mom, it'll be fun," she'd said, her face bright with the optimism of her 25 years. "We can find out if we're really as Irish as Grandpa always said, or if there's some royal blood hiding in there." I'd laughed and hugged her, placing the box on the counter with a pile of other well-intentioned gifts. Fun. It seemed like such a simple, harmless word. I was Eleanor Reed, a 50-year-old widow, a mother, a librarian who found comfort in the quiet, predictable order of books. My story, I thought, was already written. The chapters were clear: a childhood in a small Ohio town, a loving but strict father named Arthur, a gentle, artistic mother named Rose who passed away 5 years ago, a wonderful 20-year marriage to my late husband, Michael, and the glorious, challenging adventure of raising Sarah. What could a little DNA test possibly add to that? A percentage of Scottish instead of Irish? A dash of Scandinavian? It was a party trick, a conversation starter. Nothing more. But Sarah was persistent. Every time she video called, she'd ask, "Have you spit in the tube yet, Mom?" Finally, on a slow Tuesday afternoon, with a rain softly tapping against the windowpane, I gave in. I opened the box, read the instructions, filled the plastic tube with my saliva, sealed it, and dropped it in the mailbox. I remember wiping a stray tear from my cheek, not from sadness, but from a strange, fleeting vulnerability. I was sending a part of myself, my very blueprint, off to strangers in a lab. I shook off the feeling, chalking it up to sentimentality. I was sending away a story that was already complete. 4 weeks later, the results arrived in my email inbox. The subject line was cheerful and impersonal: "Your ancestry DNA results are ready." I clicked the link, a small smile on my face. Sarah was coming over for dinner, and I thought we could look at them together. The website loaded, showing a map of the world with colorful arcs spreading across it. I scanned the percentages. 47% England and Northwestern Europe. 33% Ireland. 12% Norway. 8% Wales. I felt a twinge of disappointment. It was so ordinary. So exactly what we'd always known. The O'Connells, my father's side, were fiercely proud of their Irish roots. The Millers, my mother's side, were solid, stoic English stock. There were no surprises. No hidden princes or exotic locales. Then my eyes drifted down the page. Below the ethnicity estimate, there was another section. DNA matches. The heading read, "Close family, first cousins." And that's when the world, my solid, well-ordered world, began to crack. At the very top of the list, above the names of cousins I knew and loved, was a name I had never seen before. James McIntyre. Predicted relationship, close family. Confidence, extremely high. My breath hitched. Close family? That could mean an aunt, an uncle, a half-sibling. A nephew. But I knew all my aunts and uncles. Sarah was my only child. I had no siblings. I clicked on the name. His profile was sparse. No photo. A location, Portland, Oregon. My heart began to hammer against my ribs, a frantic, panicked rhythm. This was a mistake. It had to be a glitch in their system. Maybe he was a first cousin I'd never met, though my parents were both only children. The close family designation burned into my retinas. I scrolled down. There was a list of shared matches. I recognized a few names, second cousins on my mother's side. And then I saw it. Another name, shared with James McIntyre. Robert O'Connell. Bobby. My father's brother's son. My first cousin. The one I'd built tree forts with, the one who gave me away at my wedding when my father was too ill. My cousin, who was a match for both me and this stranger, James. The logic was inescapable, a cold, brutal math. If Bobby and I shared DNA from our O'Connell grandparents, and Bobby and James shared DNA, then James and I had to be connected through the O'Connell line. But my father, Arthur O'Connell, had no brothers. Only a sister, who had died young. The only other O'Connell man was my father. The room tilted. The gentle patter of the rain turned into a roar in my ears. I stared at the screen, at the name James McIntyre, and a single, terrifying sentence formed in my mind, so loud it was almost a scream. My father wasn't my father. The rest of the afternoon was a blur. I somehow managed to cancel dinner with Sarah, making a weak excuse about a migraine. I heard the disappointment in her voice, but I was too numb to care. I sat at the kitchen table, the same table where my family had shared thousands of meals, and I felt like a ghost in my own life. I looked at the framed photos on the wall. There was my wedding photo, me beaming between Michael and my parents. My mother, Rose, so beautiful and fragile in her lace dress. My father, Arthur, his hand on my shoulder, his face a mask of stern pride. He was a quiet man, a carpenter, a man of few words and deep, unwavering principles. He wasn't demonstrative, but he was constant. He was my rock. Or was he? Had that sternness been something else? A distance? A constant, quiet reminder of a secret he was forced to keep? I thought of my mother. Her gentle hands, her love of poetry, the faint scent of lavender that always clung to her. Had her life been a lie? Had their entire marriage, the foundation upon which I'd built my own understanding of love and family, been a carefully constructed fiction? That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in the dark, the digital ghost of James McIntyre haunting me. Who was he? How old was he? Was he the secret, or was I? The next morning, fueled by a desperate, gnawing need for answers, I did the thing I knew I shouldn't. I sent him a message through the Ancestry website. My fingers trembled as I typed. Hello, James. My name is Eleanor Reed. According to our DNA results, we are a very close match. I was wondering if you might be open to talking. I'm trying to understand our connection. Best, Eleanor. I hit send and felt a wave of nausea. I had set a boulder rolling down a hill, and I had no idea what it would crush on its way down. He replied within an hour. His message was cautious, polite. Hello, Eleanor. I saw the match as well. It was quite a surprise. I'd be happy to talk. Would you like to exchange email addresses? We did. And then, sitting at my kitchen table, the same spot where I'd so carelessly filled that DNA tube, I wrote him a longer email. I told him about myself, about my parents, Arthur and Rose O'Connell, about growing up in Ohio. I asked him if any of the names sounded familiar. His reply, when it came, was like a physical blow. Eleanor, thank you for your message. My mother's name was Catherine McIntyre. She passed away 10 years ago. She never married. She told me my father was a man she met while he was traveling for work in the late 1960s. She said his name was Arthur. Arthur O'Connell. She said he was from Ohio. I read the words once. Then again. And a third time. The letters swam on the screen. Arthur O'Connell. From Ohio. It was true. The secret was real. James was my half-brother. My father had another son. A son he never knew, a son he never acknowledged. A life lived in parallel to mine, completely unknown. But the math, the cold, hard math, was still ticking in the back of my mind. James and I were a close family match. The shared centimorgans were high. Very high for half-siblings. I went back to the Ancestry website, my hands shaking so violently I could barely type. I found a relationship predictor tool and entered the number of centimorgans James and I shared. The result flashed on the screen. Predicted relationship, full sibling. Confidence, high. Full sibling. The air left my lungs in a rush. I couldn't breathe. This wasn't just my father having a secret child. This was something else. Something far more devastating. If James and I were full siblings, that meant we shared both parents. Which meant the man I called my father, Arthur O'Connell, was also his father. And the woman I called my mother, Rose, was also his mother. But that was impossible. My mother had only been pregnant once. With me. Unless. A memory, long buried and fuzzy at the edges, surfaced. I was maybe 7 or 8. I'd had a nightmare and crawled into bed with my parents. I'd snuggled against my mother's back, and in the dark, I'd heard her crying. Soft, muffled sobs. My father's voice, gruff and low, had said, "It's all right, Rosie. We have Eleanor. She's enough. She has to be enough." At the time, I'd thought it was about money, or about his work. Now, the words took on a new, horrifying meaning. She's enough. She has to be enough. I felt a dizzying, vertiginous drop, as if the floor of my childhood home had given way. I wasn't just discovering a secret. I was discovering that I was the consolation prize. The child they had after they'd lost, who? Had they lost a child? Had my mother given a baby up for adoption? But James was born in November of 1969. I was born in April of 1973. That was only a 3.5-year gap. A new, even more terrifying thought began to form, a monstrous shape emerging from a deep fog. It was so awful, so blasphemous, that my mind recoiled from it. I opened a new email to James. My subject line was just a question mark. In the body, I wrote only 2 sentences. James, this is going to sound insane. But what is your exact date of birth? His reply was almost instantaneous. November 17, 1969. I stared at the numbers. November 17, 1969. My birthday is April 14, 1973. 3 years and 5 months. A full-term pregnancy is 9 months. The math left a gap of 2 years and 8 months. Enough time for a woman to have a baby, give it away, grieve, and have another. But if my mother had given birth to James in 1969, why would she have given him up? My parents were married. They were young, but they were stable. It didn't make sense. I opened my laptop again, my fingers like ice. I went to a public records website, one I sometimes used for genealogical research. With a trembling heart, I typed in Catherine McIntyre, and the year, 1969, and the city, Portland. There were a few results. I refined the search. And then I found it. A birth announcement in a digitized Portland newspaper from November 20, 1969. McIntyre. On November 17, to Catherine McIntyre, a son, James Arthur. James Arthur. My father's name was Arthur. She had named her son after him. This was not the act of a fleeting affair. This was the act of a woman in love. The pieces were all there, but the picture they formed was impossible. My mother, the gentle poet, having a child with my father, and giving him away? It didn't fit. It was like trying to force the wrong piece into a puzzle. And then, the final, monstrous thought I had been suppressing broke through the surface, fully formed and undeniable. What if my mother, Rose, wasn't James's mother? What if we were full siblings, sharing a father, but not a mother? What if Arthur O'Connell had an affair with Catherine McIntyre, and James was the result? But that would make us half-siblings, not full. The DNA said full. The only logical conclusion, the only one that fit the brutal, unassailable math of the DNA, was that Arthur O'Connell was the father of us both. And Rose Miller O'Connell was the mother of us both. Which could only mean one thing. I was not Eleanor O'Connell, born in 1973. I was someone else. The truth, when it finally came, was not a single revelation but a series of collapsing realities, each one smothering the last. I began a frantic, obsessive search. I combed through every family document I had. My birth certificate was there, perfectly normal, listing Arthur and Rose as my parents. I found my baby book, filled with my mother's elegant script. Eleanor, first smile. Eleanor's first steps. The love in those pages felt real. It had to be real. In a dusty box in the attic, I found my mother's old papers. And tucked inside a book of Yeats' poetry, I found a folded, yellowed document. It was a birth certificate. Name, Baby Girl Miller. Date of birth, April 14, 1973. Mother, Rose Miller. Father, unknown. My blood ran cold. Baby Girl Miller. Mother, Rose Miller. Father, unknown. This was me. This was my original birth certificate. But why? Why was my father not listed? They were married. They had been married since 1968. I kept digging. Beneath that certificate was another, newer one. A certificate of live birth. This one had my name. Eleanor Rose O'Connell. Parents, Arthur O'Connell and Rose O'Connell. It was dated 6 months after my birth. A delayed registration? It happened sometimes. But then I saw it. A small, official-looking stamp in the corner. It wasn't from a hospital. It was from a law firm. Sterling and Gray, Family Law. Adoption. The word echoed in the silent attic. It wasn't a thought, it was a sensation, a freezing cold that started in my core and spread outwards until my very fingertips were numb. I wasn't their biological child. But the DNA said James and I were full siblings. If I was adopted, how could that be? The only answer was the one my mind had been screaming at me for days, the one I had refused to hear. I wasn't adopted by strangers. I was adopted by my biological grandparents. Arthur and Rose O'Connell weren't my parents. They were my grandparents. James McIntyre wasn't my half-brother. He was my full brother. The son of Arthur and Rose's son. Their firstborn son. A son I never knew existed. A son whose name was, what? I fell back onto the dusty attic floor, the papers fluttering from my hands. The world had not just tilted, it had inverted. The people I called Mom and Dad were my grandparents. The man I'd known as my stern, quiet father was, in fact, my grandfather. The gentle, artistic woman I'd called Mom was my grandmother. And I had a brother. A brother my grandparents had raised as their own son, who had gotten a girl pregnant in 1969, and then, vanished. Died? Why would they do this? Why would they claim their son's child as their own? The answer came to me with a chilling clarity. The 1960s. The shame of an unwed pregnancy. The desire to avoid scandal. They had taken James, their grandson, and passed him off as their son. And then, years later, they had me. And they did the same thing. But what happened to our real father? Their son? I emailed James again, my words tumbling out in a frantic, barely coherent stream. I told him everything, the birth certificates, my theory. I asked him, did your mother, Catherine, ever say anything else about Arthur? About what happened to him? His reply took a day. When it came, it was short and devastating. Eleanor. I have his letters. My mother kept them. All of them. His name was Arthur, but she called him Artie. He was young. He was going to join her in Portland after he finished a final job with his father. A construction project. He never came. She wrote to his parents' address, but the letters were returned, marked addressee deceased. She assumed he had died. She never knew about me until it was too late to tell him. Addressee deceased. Their son. Artie. Our father. He had died just before or after James was born. My grandparents had lost their only son. And in their grief, they had taken his son, James, and claimed him as their own to keep a part of him alive. And then, years later, they had taken me, his daughter, and done the same. They had buried their son and built a new family out of his children, living a lie to outrun a tragedy. I thought of my childhood then, not with anger, but with a heartbreaking, profound new understanding. The sternness in Arthur's eyes wasn't distance, it was the ghost of his dead son looking back at him every day. The sadness in my mother's, my grandmother's, poetry was a mother's endless grief. The phrase, "You have your father's eyes," took on a terrifying new meaning. I did. I had my grandfather's eyes. But they thought I had their son's eyes. I was living a life meant for someone else. I was a living, breathing memorial. I finally called Sarah. I told her everything, my voice cracking under the weight of the story. She listened, silent and shocked. When I was finished, she whispered, "Oh, Mom. So, Grandpa Arthur was my great-grandfather?" "Yes, honey," I said, tears finally streaming down my face. "And the man you called Mom was your great-grandmother. And this man, James, he's my uncle?" "He's my brother," I said, the words feeling both alien and true. A month later, I booked a flight to Portland. James and I had spoken on the phone, our conversations initially awkward, then filled with a frantic, shared need to piece together the story of the father we never knew. When I saw him at the airport, it was like looking into a strange, male mirror. We had the same O'Connell jawline, the same Miller nose. We stood there, two middle-aged strangers bound by blood and a 50-year-old secret, and we hugged, crying in the middle of the baggage claim. He showed me the letters. Dozens of them, in a young man's slanted handwriting. Our father, Artie, was funny, passionate, and deeply in love with Catherine. He talked about his plans, his dreams of moving to the West Coast, his frustration with his own father's old-fashioned ways. The last letter was dated 2 weeks before his death. He was excited about a final carpentry job he was doing with his dad, building a porch. He promised he'd be on a train to Portland within the month. He never made it. James had a single, grainy newspaper clipping. Local man, 22, dies in construction fall. Arthur, Artie, O'Connell Jr. My grandparents had raised us in the house their son had died building. The final piece of my life's puzzle was a picture I never knew I was part of. The love my grandparents had for us was real. It was fierce and protective and absolute. But it was a love born from unspeakable loss, a love that had to hide in the shadow of a lie. I don't know if I can ever forgive them for the deception. But I think I understand it. In their grief, they saw a chance to save us, and a chance to save a part of him. They chose a lie that felt like love. I go to the cemetery now when I visit Ohio. I used to just visit the graves of Arthur and Rose O'Connell. Now, I also visit a small, weathered headstone I never noticed before, tucked away in the corner. Arthur O'Connell Jr. beloved son. 1947-1969 I put flowers on all 3 graves. For the grandparents who raised me. And for the father I never knew, the ghost who shaped my entire life. And I have a brother. In the wreckage of the past, I found a piece of my future. The DNA test that shattered my story ultimately gave me a new one. It's a story of loss, and lies, and the messy, complicated, heartbreaking love that somehow, against all odds, endures.